All right, welcome everyone to this webinar, which I've been looking forward to for weeks, and bringing back Steve Psaradellis from Australia and talking about project flow. So we've had on Steve before a couple of times for a very impactful session on his improvements with project in his MSP with ConnectWise and TopLeft. So he's been in projects and the space for many years, as you can see on this slide, working with obviously a lot of all the Microsoft platforms, Citrix, lots of virtual desktop stuff. Don't understand everything he does, but lots of big projects, small projects too. And so his content has been very helpful. I've shared that video many times with clients, and so we're bringing him back. And so we've expanded the content, added another 20 minutes to it. I got questions prepared, and obviously any questions that you guys bring, we'll integrate as well. So pop them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll see if we work it in as we go along or at the end. So as I said, Steve, welcome again. Thanks for doing this. And I feel a lot warmer looking at your background, this nice sunny skies. I know it's virtual, but I just feel so good with that because it's like dark and cold here in the Pacific Northwest.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, as you know, this is a virtual background, but if I moved my camera to the real background, it's exactly the same. So
Okay.
I feel sorry for you guys in the north, but yeah, it's a beautiful day outside. And
Yeah.
I live in a place called the Sunshine Coast, and there's a reason it's called the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So I will stop sharing and hand it off to you. You can go and share your deck.
Thank you. Let me know if you can see the deck.
Got it. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good whatever time of day it is for you watching this. So today we're going to talk about making projects profitable. Now, some of you may have attended previous presentations of this. It is mostly the same, but as Wim said, we've got 20 minutes of extra goodies to actually insert in there for you. And we're going to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So any questions you've got, if they come up as you go, then put them in the chat so you remember them. That's fine. If you feel that it's pressing that you ask the question straight away, well, let us know. I'm fine with stopping the presentation and taking a couple of questions on whatever we're presenting at the time. Otherwise, we're going to take a little Q&A break after the first part, and then I'll present the rest of the content, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So today, the things that we're going to talk about, there's a bunch of theory there, but really we're going to talk about the fundamentals and how to actually implement them. Now, the fundamentals are fundamentals for a reason. And again, if you've seen some of this before, that's great. But as you and I know, when you watch a presentation or you learn something new, the second time you see it, you go, oh, I don't remember seeing that, or I don't remember hearing that. I need to go and implement that. So repetition is the mother of all learning. That's a saying that has been going around for a while. So the fundamentals still apply. Nothing has changed, in my opinion, in the last couple of decades with regards to how to apply them. So here they are again. And we're going to talk about the items that make the biggest impact. Like I've got days and days of content that we could talk about, but I'm going to give you the big stuff. So that's what today's about. So do some of these things apply to you? Are you struggling to get your projects finished on time? I could easily put my hand up, 10 years ago, every single time. Do you have budget overruns, right? Especially ones where you as the MSP has to wear. Like, do you do fixed price projects where, the price may not cover the project every single time? And I'm sure you've seen this one before. Do you suffer from scope creep? Engineers are out there doing projects and you've agreed to do A, B, C, and they've come back and done D, E, F, and G, and probably missed some of A, B, and C. So if you answer yes to any of these, you're in the right place.
Yeah, that was me 10 years ago. That's why I started TopLeft. I remember this project I quoted at 200 hours, and I'd put some padding and buffers in there. I'm like, yeah, should be good, right?
Yeah.
And sold it and got the money. I think when we were done, it was 800 hours.
Yeah, I was going to ask if people had any examples, but you take the cake on that one, Wim.
So it was brutal. It was a very tough year.
Yeah, like we've had one that we quoted 100 grand and $190,000 worth of work later. We were still going, but yours beats mine, hands down, not a problem. But What's great about that is we learned our lessons, right? You got to
Yeah.
learn your lessons the hard way. And I wish I'd had someone come and tell me this stuff 20 years ago, but I was lucky to stumble across this, 2008 to 2012 timeframe, and then start really implementing it in the 2016 timeframe. So here's what was happening to us 10 years ago. Our project budgets were averaging 130%. What that means is that if we quoted $100,000 to do a project, it was costing us on average $130,000. So I don't know what sort of numbers you're working with. It could be, $10,000 project costing 13. Could be $1 million project costing 1.3 million. So this wasn't great because our team was working very hard. It wasn't like they were slacking off or anything like that. And we seemed to just go over every single time. So that 130 is an average. So there were some projects that were, on budget. Some were slightly under. Most were over. And that brought our average up. So what did we do about it? Well, today we're going to have a look at how to finish more projects on time. That's an obvious one, right? How to keep them in budget and in scope, right? That's those two go together. You want to keep them in budget and scope. And finally, this is an interesting one. You want to protect your best people from burning out. And when I say your best people, we're going to find that you have, as you know, some people that are relied upon a lot for particular areas. You'll have subject matter experts in your organization that everybody goes to, and they tend to get all the major projects and they tend to be super busy in your organization. The worst thing that can happen is those people burn out and they go and do something else. I remember a while ago, I had someone that was in IT for a long time. They actually worked for IBM in the Lotus Notes division a while ago, and they were so burnt out they opened a creche, right? They totally went out of the industry. So I saw that happen during COVID times as well, where people just said, "I'm out." Right. So we've got some bonus content today about project flow. So here's the first thing we need to know. Multitasking can kill. Subtitle, project timelines. So what is multitasking? Now, everybody here in IT, we were the ones that invented the term multitasking. And that came about from having computer CPUs, obviously, go and do something and then get interrupted and then be able to go do something else. And then get that interrupted and come back to the first thing. That is actually what multitasking is. For the purposes of today, multitasking in this context is if you start a task and before you finish that task, you go off and do a different task. That is what we're going to term as multitasking, which is the true meaning in the IT industry, right? The CPU gets interrupted, stops, does something else, comes back to it. So why is multitasking bad? Okay. Let's have a look at an example here. Let's say we've got 3 projects of equal length. They're going to take 15 business days to actually complete, or 3 weeks effort. What do we tend to do when we've got 3 projects we're about to start? Like, what does everyone's intuition say to do? Well, let's start these projects as soon as possible so we can finish them as soon as possible. So what happens? Let's have a look at this example. If we start project A and we do a week on it, we might go and do project B and do another week and do project C. So all 3 projects are started. Fantastic. We're up and running. Then we go back to A, B, C, and obviously back to A, B, and C. And we've finished those 3 projects. But how long did it take to finish each project? Let's actually measure it. On which day, and please use the chat, or I don't know if people can unmute themselves, you can yell it out. On which day did project A finish? I've got the days on top. Feel free to throw it in the chat. Are we allowing people to put things in the chat? Or are they putting?
Yeah, we'll wait here because we got lots of people, so we'll wait for somebody to put that in the chat.
Okay. It's not a trick question, okay? It's a simple question. All right, we've got some bids there. Yep, thank you. 35, 35, 30. Okay, looks like there's a little bit of consensus on 35. That is the correct answer. Where did Project B finish? Thank you. We got 40. And what happened to Project C? 45. Thank you very much. All right, so Project A finishes in 35 business days, B in 40, and C in 45. Interesting. What if we did something different? So let's take an average. That is an average of 40 business days to complete those 3 projects. Obviously, if you add those 3 numbers and divide by 3, you're going to get 40. So let's have a look at another method. Instead of focusing on starting things as soon as possible, what if we focus on finishing instead? So this time around, we're going to do Project A for the first 3 weeks, Project B for the next 3 weeks, and Project C for the final 3 weeks. We are not going to multitask these projects. We're just going to focus on finishing what we start. If you wouldn't mind again, what day does Project A finish in? Thank you. I'm getting some 15s. Project B should be pretty obvious. Good. Someone's giving me all the answers. Thank you. 15, 30, and 45. We can fast track that.
Yeah.
But hang on a second. These are the exact same projects. And the first one finished in only 15 days. The second one in 30. And funnily enough, the third one finished in 45 as well. So what's the average? The average is now 30 days. And all we changed was we stopped starting projects and we focused on finishing projects. Same resources, same projects, same timeframes. So hang on a second, is that how the real world works? Well, when we do multitasking, if you start something and you don't finish it, and then you need to come back to it, does it take the same amount of time to finish? Of course not. There's always an overhead to restarting something. You got to remember what you're up to, log into the right systems, depending on what you're doing. As a minimum, that adds 20% to any restart tasks. So let's look at reality here. If we started Project A here, B and C, like we did last time, Project A would take slightly longer to go the next time around. B would take slightly longer, C, and you can see how that's going to work. So the actual days, if we just assume the average of 20% overhead to restart a task or part of a project, is going to be day 39, 45, and 51. So let's compare that with doing it with the focus on finishing methodology, all right? So this was 39 instead of 35, 45 instead of 40, and 51 instead of 45. So the real average here is 45 business days. Can anyone remember what the average was when we were focusing on finishing? Oh, thank you. 30, that is correct. That is correct. So what's the difference between finishing on average in 45 days and finishing on average in 30 days? Well, to me, that's a third less time. Or if you want to look at the math the other way around, it takes 50% longer to finish projects if you multitask. Now, keep in mind, this is 3 simple projects. Now, I think none of you are running just 3 simple projects. So the overhead of restarting and multitasking is much, much greater. This is the simplest example I could give you, and it still takes 50% longer. So please remember, multitasking kills project timelines. So the first thing you want to do is focus on finishing. All right? It's counterintuitive. Everyone's brain's going to go, hey, but if I start sooner, I finish sooner. But it doesn't add up that way. That's not reality. It's just what it feels like. Yeah. So where do you start to do this? How do you go about doing this? So we know what the problem is. How do we solve the problem? First thing you must do is make work visible. If you can't see what you're doing and you can't see what's going on, and it's not easy to see, then how do you measure it? How do you figure out what's going on? So obviously, we're going to use things like TopLeft to make work visible. That's the first thing we do. The second thing we do is we stop starting and start finishing. Again, counterintuitive. You've got to stop starting. If you've got projects ready to go, stop. What do you do instead? Well, you finish what you've got on the table right now as quickly as possible. You just focus on that. How do you do that? Well, you limit what we call work in progress, or WIP. In our team, we chose 5 projects as our limit. In other words, we can only have 5 active projects for our project team at any given time. Now, truth is that some projects have natural gaps. So you might, do this project and then you're waiting for a month or 2 for the client to do something, as an example. They might be, moving office or waiting for a delivery for something. Sure, during that gap, obviously we start other projects or we continue other projects. But at any given time, we don't have more than 5. If you have more than whatever number you choose, and I'm going to suggest 5 is a good number to start per project team, you might have more than one team, then if you've got 8 going, what are you going to have to do? Well, believe it or not, you're going to have to pause 3 of them. And until you finish one, you can't start another one, right? That is the only way to get out of this mess of multitasking. You literally have to pick the 3 that you can, I was going to say you can afford to have delayed, but guess what? Here's the truth. By delaying those 3, every project, including those 3, will finish quicker. That's the scary bit, right? So I suggest give that a go. Focus on finishing, but limit the number of projects you have running in parallel.
So this question, Steve, is like when you were doing this, how many people in your team and how many projects did you do previously? Like what was the before and after?
Yeah, good question. So our team of actual engineers was less than 10. And I don't know how many we were doing, but it was more than 10 projects. I guarantee you each engineer had more than one project on the table. So we had to just do effectively a priority list. And our priority list was based on what we thought we could finish first. All of us are in the industry, and we know that engineers leave stuff unfinished. The biggest issue we had was projects were lingering due to documentation, right? Little things like that. Or, 3 little items we promised the client that we would do, and they just dragged on and dragged on. So we said, stop, which ones can we finish quickly? Bang, 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 let's finish those. And eventually, and it took a couple of months, we got it under 5. And then from then on, it's been 5. That's it. We try to do more than 5, something has to stop.
Yeah. And I guess, how do you balance that when you got urgency from clients who are like, I need this right away? And so how do you deal with those clients?
Yeah. Well, you have to convince your own team first, right? So maybe show them this video or the previous slides that by focusing on finishing, everything will run faster. Everything. So there's no other way to do it.
Yeah.
This is the way to get it actually done fast. So how do you convince people? You go, well, we're putting something in so that your project is actually going to finish faster. That's what they need to know.
Yeah.
Focus on the result. The process, just follow it. As one of my business coaches says, believe me now, trust me later. Okay.
Yeah. It's science. It will work. It's how it works. Yeah.
That's right.
And I guess, did you have any other pushback from your team when you started getting into this?
Listen, it took 6 months. All right. This is not an overnight thing. It took a few years to get to the point of knowing what to do. And it took 6 months to implement it.
Yeah.
But we had no direct help at the time. I had a lot of well-known industry-leading consultants in this stuff that I was working with, but to actually implement, we did it in-house, and it took half a year to get it going.
Yeah.
Other companies that have this information in front of them can take them a month or 2 just to change their habits.
Yeah.
So
one more question in there, Steve. Oh, it's slipping my mind. Oh yeah. So with your team, Were you already working that it was already team-based format, or did previously everyone just have their own projects that they were like lead on and doing on their own? Like what was that silo, single player, team player kind of thing? How was that?
There was a tiny bit of overlap where we might have had two people in a project because they had different skills. So, you know, somebody may have been stronger in networking and security, and the other person was stronger in infrastructure, as an example.
Yep.
But generally speaking, each engineer at that time had their lot of projects, not project, projects, plural. Right?
Yep.
So that was our team then. This luckily applies to any team, and we can talk about team sizes and doing stuff like that in the Q&A at the end.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, if you've got a very large environment, you break this down per team, okay? Because each team is obviously doing different sorts of projects. Treated as its own little organization, effectively.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah, keep going.
All right. So when we go to budget the amount of time it takes to do a project, we did a little experiment to see how engineers' brains worked effectively. And me being an engineer, I knew how my brain worked, but I decided to test it with our team. So when you ask an engineer to estimate how long a project's going to take, this is what generally tends to happen. This is the rule we came up with. The 2 times engineer rule plus the project management added buffer rule. So if in an engineer's head, what happens is they think, oh, this task is going to take 1 hour or 1 day, whatever it is. In this case, 2 hours. What do engineers do? They go, well, I should double it. I should really put some safety in there because, you know, it might take longer. And if I say it's going to take 2 hours and it takes more, I'm going to look bad. So I'll say it's going to take 4 hours. So the engineer gives you this is how long it's going to take. And then if you've got a project manager, they look at the hours and go, yeah, things can go wrong. We should add another buffer. And project managers tend to add another quarter to things for some reason on average. So that 2-hour job that should take 2 hours ends up being quoted as 5 hours. And I can remember a situation where we were sitting in the boardroom talking about this stuff. And I asked the engineers, well, how do you estimate time when we ask you? And I could see one guy, and I could look at it, I could see his head ticking, right? He was just thinking. And I said, his name is Marcus. I said, Marcus, what are you thinking? He goes, well, yeah, every time I estimate, I double it. And then I showed him the slide, right? I went, yep, that's what we thought. So, and as the project manager, we would add 25%. So if a 2-hour job is generally quoted as 5 hours, and you know, sometimes sales needs to bring that down, we get that to fit into certain budgets. But how come projects then run over budget over time? If the engineers and project managers are always overestimating. How come? Well, there's a few reasons. Reason number 1, student syndrome. I'm sure we've all been students at one point in time. Yeah.
Oh, I still am, man.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm
yes.
still learning. I'm not done yet. While I'm standing.
How many books have you got back, Wim, and how many have you got electronically? Yeah.
Too many.
Too many, yeah. So what is student syndrome? Well, it's effectively planned procrastination. Now, if you can remember when you were in school, if you had an assignment due in 3 weeks' time, did you start it today? Or did you start it the night before? I'll put my hand up. I started it the night before and I went through the night, okay? This is natural. It's like, I've got plenty of time. And then you start really, really late. So that's one reason projects run over time, because people start as late as they can, or as late as they want to. So what this means is that any safety margins that may have been put in from a elapsed time perspective are all gone because we're starting at the last minute. The next reason why projects run over budget and over time is a thing called Parkinson's law. So Parkinson's law says that work will expand to fill the time allotted for its completion. In other words, if I said to you to write that assignment, you get the next 3 days, or to do this project, you get the next 3 days. How long is it going to take if I give you 3 days? And the answer is at least 3 days. It's not going to finish early, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But so this is important. We've got to be mindful of how much time we allocate to people to do things. Because if we give them 3 days, they'll do it in 3 plus. If we give them a day and a half, guess what? They'll do it in a day and a half plus. Exact same task. The next one is gold plating. So what's gold plating? Well, basically when our people go and do a project and they deliver more than was promised. And I always remember this story. I read the book, I don't remember the author, but it was about the studio that made Toy Story. Ah, there you go. Oh, there's that one too.
It was in here too, I think, but
Yeah, I think it was. I've read too many books to remember what it was. But what actually happened in Toy Story, and I'm sure most of you are old enough to remember what Toy Story is, animated movie. The graphics people, there's a particular scene in the child's room where they're panning across the room, and in the background there's a bunch of DVDs. I'm sure people here remember what DVDs are. And if you were to freeze frame and zoom in on those DVDs, they had accurately put the things on the spines of the DVDs of the actual movies on those DVDs. They took the time and effort to be accurate. Now, unless you had a DVD player yourself and you were watching the movie and you freeze framed it and zoomed in, you wouldn't know that. Did that add value to the movie, to the project? Absolutely not. That is an example of gold plating, where people will go above and beyond what's in scope because they've got too much time to do something. And this ties in with Parkinson's law, so we'll come back to that. And one more thing that actually will cause projects to run over budget or over time is Murphy's law. So also known as shit will happen. So Murphy's law is anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Okay. We can't avoid Murphy, but we can avoid everything else. What we can do is cater for Murphy. So now that we know these are the things that cause projects to run over budget and over time, well, what can we do to keep them in budget? Let me show you what we do. So let's say we've got a bunch of tasks, big chunky tasks that we have to run in a project. You can call them milestones, you can call them whatever you like. Typically what happens is that what we do is we say, well, the engineers, we know that it's a 2-hour task or a 2-day task. We know they doubled it to 4, and we know that the project manager added even more time. So pretend task A is that 5-hour or 5-day thing. We take the 50% rule. So we cut it in half, and we only allocate half the time to the engineer to do that task. We do the same thing with task B and task C. What we have left over is what we call the buffer time. So we take the buffer time that people allocated per task and project managers added to the whole project, and we add it to what we call the project buffer. So now the safety is no longer in a per task scenario. The safety is in the whole project. So what that means is that that's how it actually breaks up, right? Where we're just halving each thing and saying to engineers, you have this much time to do the work. Now, what's going to happen in reality? If you give an engineer half the time, well, generally they won't remember how much time they allocated. So they'll try and get it done in that time because Parkinson's law will kick in like, oh, I've got a day and a half to do it. I'll do it in a day and a half. But what happens if they go over? That's okay, because if they go over, we've got all this project buffer that we can actually allocate. So if that person doing that job in a day and a half instead of 3 says, oh, I'm not finished yet, you go, that's fine. You can have another half day. Go for it. Or you can even have another day and a half. Go for it. So the extra time gets used when they run out of time, as opposed to allocating the whole time to them, and then they're going to use it anyway, because Parkinson's law will kick in. And then, of course, student syndrome will kick in. And then, of course, gold plating will kick in. So they're always going to be late. So that's how we do it. Now, we call it the 50% rule. You may find it's a 30% rule. You may find it's a 70% rule. I don't know how you cost your projects, but I guarantee there's time in there that gets wasted that should be allocated to a project buffer rather than a task buffer. So here's the question. By the way, if you've got questions on this, you can leave them to the end or type them in. I think it's good to have a little discussion at the end about this, because I'm sure some people want to know how to actually implement this. We're going on to the next topic. So how do we protect our people from burning out, our best people from burning out? Well, the first thing we're going to do is find what we call our bottleneck person or persons per project area. Now, we all know it. There's usually a person per subject that is the expert in our organization, maybe a couple. And whenever shit hits the fan, we go to them. Whenever there's a difficult project, we go to them. Whenever there's a question, we go to them. They are pretty easy to identify as to who your bottleneck person or persons are per project area. Okay. So once we've identified who that bottleneck person is, what do we do to keep projects in budget? Well, believe it or not, we actually remove task deadlines from the bottleneck person, only the bottleneck person. And this is a thing we call the Roadrunner rule. Now, does anyone remember the cartoon, The Roadrunner, with the Wile E. Coyote that was always trying to kill him? All right, Wim doesn't watch cartoons. He led a, what do you call it, a restricted childhood.
Yeah, no TV, no movies.
Okay.
So well, we out to the neighbors.
So I'll let you in on the secret. The Roadrunner in this cartoon had two speeds. He had this speed running flat out. There's the Roadrunner, if you don't remember him. And then he had this other speed, which was full stop. You didn't see him go at any other speed in the cartoon. He was either running away or he would just come to a complete stop. He had much better than ABS brakes. He would just stop instantly. So what does the Roadrunner rule mean? It means your bottleneck resource, if they are working on a project, and for some reason there is a small delay in that project, intuitively, what do we do with that time? We go, hey, why don't we get that person to work on something else? There's like 5 tickets they could be working on. Let's make sure their utilization is up. Let's get it above 80%. So what happens? That person goes and works on those 5 tickets. The project becomes unstuck after a few hours or a day, whatever it is. And what happens to those 5 tickets? The answer is they keep working on them because they've started all these other things. And the tickets are generally, break fix or a request that shouldn't take much time. And instead of coming back to the project and continuing when it was ready, they go and spend all this time on other tickets that somebody else could have been doing. So what happens? That whole project gets delayed simply because we think that utilization being high for everybody is a must. Exactly the opposite. What you want to do with your bottleneck resource, if there's a small delay, instead of them running out flat out, they need to stop. And when I say stop, they need to go and have a cup of coffee, grab well, if it's a Friday afternoon, they can go and grab a beer at the pub. You want to avoid giving them anything that's going to take time away from the project. So coming to a complete stop is the best thing you can do for your bottleneck resources. Again, I'm open to be challenged on this. I want to hear questions about this at the end, but this is how you should treat your bottleneck resources. So how do you go about this? Number 1, find your bottleneck person per area, person or persons. Number 2, optimize their time. What do we mean by optimizing their time? Well, if there's something someone else can do, guess what? Give it to someone else. When we started doing this, I got pushback saying, but this person can do the job in 2 hours If I give it to somebody else, they're going to take twice as long because they're not as good. So should we leave it with the person that's going to do it quicker? Well, no, not if they're the bottleneck resource. Because if they're the bottleneck resource, the whole project will get delayed. It is better for somebody else to go and do that 2 hours worth of work in 4 hours and the bottleneck resource to stay on the project than giving it to the person that can do it the fastest. You don't want to do that. You want to protect your bottleneck's time. So that's number one, remove work. Number two, schedule their time across multiple projects where they're needed. You're going to typically find these people that are bottleneck resources are probably allocated to more than one project because they have a specific capability or a specific skill that nobody else can do, or nobody else can do as well as them. So they are typically bouncing around projects anyway. So we're going to talk about this later on, or I'll show you how to do that. Next, get others involved. So guess what? They have unique knowledge. What do you want? You want the rest of your team to have that knowledge. Get someone to shadow them and document, document, document. If they're the only ones that can do something, break that and make sure that you've got that documented so anyone can do it. There's a thing called help desk mode. What's help desk mode? We all go to these bottleneck resources to ask questions, but by doing so, we interrupt them. And if we interrupt them, what does that cause? Can someone put the magical word in the chat? If we're stopping someone from doing a task before they, continue, what is that thing we want to avoid? Thank you. Multitasking. All right. So by interrupting them, you are causing multitasking. What do you do instead? Well, you basically schedule some time and say at 3 p.m. every day, this person will be available for 15 minutes to answer all your questions. Then it's no longer an interruption. It's a scheduled event where everybody knows to bring their questions. They get them all answered, and then the bottleneck resource can get on with their day. Okay? You might want to do this once a day, once a week, 3 times a week. It's up to you. Depends on how often you think people need to ask them questions. Here's an interesting quote. I'll let you read this and tell me what you think. Yes, I know that doesn't mathematically add up, but isn't that true?
True.
Yeah. We get to the last 10%, and that takes the other 90% of the time to finish, right? So I'm going to strongly suggest you focus on finishing and limit work in progress and start by making work visible, right? That's the way you go about it. So in summary, how to finish more projects in time. As we just said, make work visible, stop starting, and start finishing. We had this made as a poster, right? We laminated that, put it around the office in the good old days when we had an office, right? Limit work in progress. Choose the amount of projects you're going to work on at once and make sure that you only work on that many. You must finish a project in order to start another project. Of course, you do that by focusing on finishing. How do you keep stuff in scope and in budget? Well, as we said, you aggregate the task buffers into a project buffer using the 50% rule or whatever percentage you experiment with and whatever makes sense for your projects. You actually remove task deadlines just for the bottleneck resources. You say, here's a task, finish it as quickly as you can, get back to me when you're ready for the next bit. And we just covered how to protect your best people, optimize their time, get others involved, and get into scheduling help desk mode, where they become the help desk to the rest of your engineers. So what happens if you implement all these things together? Well, this is what happened to us. Our projects went from an average of 130% to 71.6% in 6 months. That is 58.4% less time and budget on average for the project. So suddenly, guess what happened? We became profitable, right? Were the clients happy? Absolutely.
Sure, yeah.
Why were the clients happy?
They get the benefit earlier, right?
Yeah, that's right. Their projects finished quicker, and budget wasn't an issue for them. We do fixed price projects, so it's like they don't care what the budget is, but we care. Okay, by doing this, our projects not only finish quicker, which means we can do more per year, but every single one of them, or on average, was more profitable by far, and I mean by far. So projects for us turned around from becoming a pain in the behind to things that we actively go out and get. Why? Because they are now profitable.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just do a little bit of a pause here. I'll take questions, but the bonus content is going to be the secrets of project flow. And we've got probably another 15, 20 minutes of extra stuff on how to go about implementing this and some of the other secrets that we discovered along the way to actually make things work. So I'm opening up to questions, whoever's got any questions.
Pop some questions in there. I've got a list of questions, but I'm looking at the time and I think oh, Elliot has a question. Let me see. You can come on live. I'm going to let you talk there.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. Steve, thanks for the presentation. Great content. I'm curious how you manage. One of the things we struggle with is managing the WIP and the number of projects that hit stops or starts based on waiting on, approval on a piece of testing and validation from a client or something else. So like tactically, functionally with either TopLeft or within manage, like how do you manage that WIP? Because I'm assuming when you're saying WIP, you mean actively scheduled work, not necessarily projects that are somewhere between signed from a client and invoiced.
Yeah, correct. But what's happening, obviously, and it's what happened to us, those projects were getting interrupted a lot, which caused us to have the natural breaks, right? And then jump into something else. But then there was too many of those natural breaks. I'm actually going to answer that in the next part of the presentation. Do you mind holding on to that question? Like I will answer. Yeah. So please tell me at the end if I've answered it to your satisfaction, but this is the next content we're going to cover. Thanks for that question, Elliot. Anyone else got any questions at this stage on what we've covered so far? Anything else in the chat? I'm not seeing the Q&A, Wim, so you let me know.
Yeah, nothing there. So I'm thinking of the bottleneck person, how did you start to move that work to other people? Like if they're away, they're sick or whatever, like how do you start moving that work so that other people can do it? What were some of the strategies? I guess you mentioned documentation, right? But what
so
else?
The one we outlined, every time we allocated a piece of work to the bottleneck resource at the time, there was one for us, we said, is this the only person that can do it? If the answer was yes, someone had to shadow them. And that shadowing person had to document it. So by the end of every single piece of work the bottleneck resource did, it was documented. Now, if it was something other people knew how to do, we didn't shadow them. So that was number one. Number two, we looked over previous tickets to see what sort of stuff was getting solved by the bottleneck resource. And we got people to go and find out how to read the tickets and find out how the bottleneck resource did it, right? So in other words, educate themselves. That's basically what we did to get started. Elliot, you got a question with that?
Yeah, maybe a follow-up question on that comment. One of my favorite books is The Phoenix Project. We've got a couple Brents in our organization, and particularly in a remote world, we find it hard to manage all of the hey misters and where the stopping, starting, multitasking, aside from just very clear directions to the team of this resource is protected. You're not allowed to even message them without getting approval from, one of these two people. So any thoughts or comments on how to manage that in today's world?
Yeah. So when you say in today's world, I'll just give a little background here. Our company is about providing resources to people that are working in remote locations. And I've been working remote since 2011. So this is normal for us. Like COVID didn't change the way we worked. So I can answer that question. as you know, if they're on Teams or some sort of other chat program, engineers are chatting to each other continuously with questions and stuff like that. And yes, you could put rules in place to go, not allowed, you must ring the service delivery manager or the project manager before getting access to that resource. So this is very familiar, Elliot. This is the same rules we set up. That was very hard to do, and it didn't work. All right. So instead of putting something like that, which is what I call a band-aid, in other words, is trying to band-aid the problem, I'll show you how to fix the root cause. So that when some of these questions escape or some of these things happen, it's not the rule anymore, it's the exception. So we don't bother with that stuff anymore because we've fixed all the underlying systems and processes, and we've implemented a culture that says, hey, did you start this right now? Yes, please finish it before we give you anything else. And I'm talking specifically about projects here, okay? If you want to wrap in the day-to-day support. So the short answer is, Elliot, that do that stuff right now as a band-aid, but I can help you to fix the underlying issue so you don't need to worry about that anymore at all, because it becomes an exception. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. Again, call me on it at the end of the presentation as to, have I given you enough? And I'm happy to stick around and give you whatever you need. Any other questions from anyone, including Elliot? Wim, do you have any questions?
I got questions, but I think we'll circle back at the end. I think we might end up going over the hour, but I think we're probably all okay with that.
Cool. All right. If I get started, I'm sure we can minimize that. So here's some of the couple of extra secrets of project flow. So Elliot mentioned this, blockers. Okay. So what happens is that blockers in projects, ones that you can predict and mitigate, obviously, create all this unnecessary delays. And as you can see, there's always going to be Murphy's Law. All right. So if we look at the root cause of blockers, then we can not eliminate them, but we can minimize them. But what do delays actually do to our projects, right? Well, they cause projects to stop-start, right? You go stop, restart, stop, restart. That is the definition of multitasking at a project level. They introduce multitasking. There you go. Right? They also cause bottleneck resources to do what we call project jump, or worse, sit idle on the bench. Okay, so those resources that have those particular skills are going to be like, oh, I'm working on this project, delay. Okay, I might as well go work on this other project, delay, and they're just project jumping without you controlling that. The project jumping is controlling you and the project resource. And obviously, all this leads to blowing out your project timelines. So how do we get rid of the blockers? How do we work on these things in advance so that all we have to do is deal with Murphy's Law, not everything else going on? Well, most organizations, including us for a very long time, try and find improvements in everything that's going on in a department or a whole organization. Can we improve this a bit better? Can we improve that a bit better? Can we improve that? Guess what? If you do what we call local optimization, which is optimize a small thing, hoping that it'll have an effect on the whole system, well, unless you pick the right thing, whatever you're doing is actually going to be counterproductive. And when I say the right thing, the thing you need to focus on is optimizing what we call the bottleneck. And in the context of today, we're optimizing the bottleneck resources, right? So it's no good improving how well someone else does something until you've improved the way your bottleneck resources do things. In every case, there's always, always, always a simple cause to most problems. Most problems are complex, but there's always a simple cause. So if we find the root cause and we fix that, guess what happens to all the symptoms? They disappear, okay?
They just evaporate.
So they evaporate. And that Wim's using that terminology for a reason. If you want to read some books like The Goal, etc., you'll learn about evaporating clouds and other fun stuff. So basically, to fix the simple cause is neither easy or quick. I admit that. So for us, I'll show you what happened in our organization. Most of our blockers, we didn't know what they were exactly. So we had to find the blockers. So after looking at projects for a long, long time, we found that the blockers that we had could have been avoided at the beginning of a project. So I'd like to introduce you to a concept that you may have heard of before called fully kitting versus partial kitting. So the definition of fully kitting is like having everything ready at the start of a project, right? Everything ready being, hey, have we got all the hardware delivered, if there's hardware involved? Have we got the Azure tenancy, spun up or whatever? Did someone pay for it? Have we got all the software licenses ready to go? Do we have time booked with the client? All these things that you could organize right at the beginning. If you do all of them at the beginning, that is known as fully kitting. Now, if you fully kit projects, they are going to run a lot better than you randomly just looking for stuff as you need it. But fully kitting is not always practical. So you might do a thing called partial kitting, which means you only have the stuff that you need to start the project right now, and then you go and get the rest of the stuff as you need it. So which one should you do? Should you fully kit or should you partially kit? Guess what the answer is? It depends, okay? So it depends on the project. If you've got a project that's going to run for a week, I'd strongly suggest you fully kit. Have everything ready before the project starts. That way, that project will start and finish within that week. If you've got a project that runs for 3 months, sometimes it's not practical or wanted that you fully kit. I'll give you an example. We implement some software, and during the implementation phase, we can use trial licenses, and it takes 3 months to implement. Would we sign up the client to their full licensing if all we need is like a couple of test users day one? Well, no, they're going to be paying for 3 months worth of licensing that nobody's using. So we would do that at least 2 or 3 weeks before the end of the project, where we're going to need those licenses. So that's an example of actually having the resources ready as they're needed, as opposed to fully kitting, which is having everything ready at the beginning. So choose based on the size and complexity of your project. So here's the secret. Plan what you need and what always delays a project, and take care of those items. I'll repeat that. Plan what you need and what always delays a project, and take care of those items. And you might be thinking, what does always mean? Well, in our example, and it took us months to notice this pattern, we found that customer prerequisites blocked 100% of our projects. Every single project was delayed by the customer not doing their prerequisites. Every single project. Well, we also found that 100% of the time it was the firewall changes we requested, and sometimes they didn't have the resources available, the servers, the cloud resources, the space to do the work, whatever it was. So by studying all of our projects over a few months, we found this is the biggest thing that delayed projects. So what we did, we focused on getting all the prerequisites done right before we allocated resources to a project. So in our contract, it says, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, you are going to do the prerequisites. We will allocate a person to help you to do the prerequisites, whether that's just bugging you on the phone or having a weekly Teams session. And until you do that, we're not even scheduling your project. Guess what they do? They go, yeah, we'll do that. And then a week later, they go, oh, we were too busy. We'll go, well, would you like us to help you with the prerequisites? Like, we'll come to your office or virtually come to your office and do them for you or do them with you. And then when they eventually get them done, guess what happens to the flow of that project? That there are no blockers. you've got all your prerequisites. Your engineers can just get in there and go for it. So your blocker might be something different. Find what your major blocker is, whether that happens 100% of the time or 80% of the time. Find the major one and put in a process to eliminate the blocker before you start scheduling projects. If those blockers happen during a project, you're saying it's not upfront, then schedule the customer to get rid of those blockers as well. Here's an example. On some larger projects we do, to finish a project, end users have to do testing. What's it called? End user EUT? I don't know the acronym, whatever the acronym, right? Guess what? We all know, what was that, Wim?
There's a bunch of acronyms that people use. Acceptable user tests, AUT.
What are that? We all know what it is. The users have got to test it, right? We would love our engineers to test it first, but you need the users to tell you that's going to work. We all know this up front. It's going to have to happen. But what happens? We come to the end of the project and go, can you get some users to test? They go, oh, they're all busy. And then another 3 weeks go by, and then they eventually test it, and then they eventually find the problems, and then your engineers have to get back into the mindset on how to fix that for a project they finished weeks ago. So what can you do? You get the customer to schedule their users for testing before the project starts. So find what's blocking your projects and do what we call the first 15% well, which is planning and scheduling. Plan and schedule the important stuff, and the non-important stuff will just fall into place. Anyone got a question on secret number 1?
Yeah, this is gold. So love to hear from people in the chat. Is this useful so far? Light up the chat there.
This revolutionized our projects, because we no longer have problems with work in progress. We no longer have problems with stopping, starting. That's just gone away.
Yeah, just seen that so many times. Like you got to do, let's say you're doing a SharePoint migration, you got to train the users.
Yeah.
It's like herding cats, right? Well, do that up front.
Do it up front, schedule it up front. Elliot, yes, I think that addresses my second question. Good. We've got 1 tick so far. We've got to knock over the first question as well. All right, let me give you secret 2, and then we can take questions from everybody. Schedule around the bottleneck resource or resources. This one's a bit scary, okay? So basically, if you remember, you got to find your bottleneck resource, optimize the time, blah, 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 but there's this one, all right? I did mention it, but I've never presented how to do it before. Let's get into it. So if someone's running ConnectWise, or what's that other software called, Wim? There's a bunch of other software there.
Autotask, Halo, etc., etc.
Well, this is what a project looks like in ConnectWise. Can anyone tell who's doing what in this view? I know I can't.
There's a resources column, but it's just a comma separated list. It's really hard to see, and it's cut off.
Yeah, but when is one person doing something, then the next person, like, is it visibly pleasant? No, I'm going cross-eyed trying to figure out who's doing what. So much better, make work visible like this. But even better, make it look like that. Yes, that's a Gantt chart. Yes, that's a top left Gantt chart, right? So step 1, make the work visible. If you can't see when people are doing what across a project and then across projects multiple, then you're not going to be able to solve this problem. If you don't have the tools ready, sure, you could put it in a spreadsheet, but I suggest obviously the tool is a much better way to do it. So what do we do once we have the information? Let's have a look at an example. You know, I love these little boxes. Let's say we've got a little resource team, could be 1 person, could be multiple people, but they do a specific thing. We have a friendly bottleneck resource, and we have a different resource team. And that's who's required to finish a project. In the real world, there'll be another project and another project. In this example, if we resource team A starts the next project as soon as they're available and then does it again, are we going to be able to complete those projects as you see on screen?
Oh, it's going to push out.
Yeah, why? Because we've got conflicts here. The bottleneck resource cannot be in 2 places at once. Okay, not possible. In fact, you can see resource team B is also overlapping, but they are much, much less important to what we're about to do. So what do? Well, we start, resource team A is fine to start the project there. The bottleneck resource is fine to go there, and resource B is fine to go there. Team A starts the next project, but guess what? There's going to be a gap before the bottleneck resource can start. Then team B can kick in, and then resource team A can do that, but guess what? There's going to be another gap. So you might be thinking, well, that's fine. We'll schedule around the bottleneck resource. There's going to be a gap here and a gap there. I'm going to suggest that that gap interrupts project flow. And you're going to do something totally, again, counterintuitive. And please be sitting down, because some of you are going to have a little bit of a heart attack here. You're going to delay the start of those projects. As scary as that sounds. Like, you're literally going to say to resource team A, it's all right, take a week off. Right? Or do something that's not related to project, whatever. And you're going to delay it. Why? That will create project flow, so you don't have these unnecessary, even though there might be known gaps in projects. But you have to schedule everything around your bottleneck resource or resource team. You have to start thinking everything depends on those bottleneck resources. The scary thing here is you might go, but that's going to cause this, that, and the other. What it causes is projects to flow smoothly and multitasking to disappear for your bottleneck resources. When you do that, you're going to see that the projects will be finishing much quicker, less time, without project scope creep, and your bottleneck resource will be unflustered. Why? Because you will not be bouncing them around projects. You'll simply be scheduling them on projects. And your job is to then schedule everybody else around them. For anyone that's read The Goal, the book The Goal, and the Phoenix Project, of course, is based on The Goal, there's a 5-step process, but you want to make sure that you, what they call subordinate to the bottleneck, which simply means you plan everything around the bottleneck resource. So that's how you do it. Now, again, this looks simple, but it is hard to implement. It takes discipline and it takes planning. But please do secret number 1 first, right? You definitely want to do secret number 1 because you want to have the already known blockers removed before you even start a project or before you finish a project. Then do secret number 2, which is scheduling your bottleneck resources for projects and then scheduling everything else around them. Okay. You might say to me, well, what if we've got a large project team? So we actually have a PMO. Does anyone know what that acronym stands for?
Project Management Office.
That's the one. Thank you. Okay. So it's a project management office. So my suggestion is you break it down into smaller chunks and you plan around each practice. Okay. Avoid trying to do a big bang approach and make all these changes across all projects, across all practices. One practice at a time, okay? So that way project managers can focus on implementing that system in one practice and then they can replicate it to other practices. It will be less disruptive to your organization. Obviously, find your blockers per practice, implement the resolution tactics of those blockers, whatever that may be, whether it's prerequisites or getting hard run time or whatever it is. And then, of course, do the bottlenecks. And basically, you have to do the scary thing and slightly delay some projects from starting to avoid that start-stop. So the secret here is, once you remove all the blockers and you get your project team to focus, you just get them to do that one thing, get it done, and everything will run better. And all those little other problems that Elliot was asking about go away. They go away naturally because there's no need for those problems to pop up. You are controlling the flow of work rather than it controlling you. So you get project flow. there's a lot in those 2 secrets. So I'm open to any questions you got. What questions, how questions, even why questions.
Wow, just like
Fun.
this goes everywhere in the business. This is not just IT projects, right? You can look at healthcare, manufacturing, sales, marketing, everywhere. So
We had it implemented in sales without knowing what it was. That's how I discovered this this process. Yeah, we had it in sales since 2008.
yeah, very powerful stuff, Steve. Like in my mind, obviously I'm in sales and marketing hat now. I'm not really a tech project, but I'm like, wow, I'm starting all these things. I'm the bottleneck. I'm better off to wait on all these things until my calendar allows me to do that approval or whatever it is.
Correct. And we use TopLeft in our sales department. I've been pushing you guys for years to add more features in that, and you did, which is great.
Yeah.
So I know we've gone over time, but if anyone's got questions, Elliot said thanks. It looks like you had to run away. That's great. Please fire away.
People there, yeah, bring on some questions. I'll since I
know you had some questions from before as well.
So obviously you've been working on this for many years. What are some of those maybe mistakes or challenges you had up front? And I guess in hindsight, what would you do differently with this whole learning journey?
Yeah, so some of the mistakes were like we got people involved early to implement these changes, but then we realized we had to get everyone involved and educate them along the way. So instead of leaving your people in the dark and just saying, this is a new way we're going to do things, make them part of your change team. And even if they turned up to a summary, like at the end of a meeting, basically give them the why so that they don't sit there going, well, why are we doing this? Right? Make them part of that team. In fact, if they're keen, let them be part of the team that implements it as well.
Yeah.
Cool. There's a question. Do your teams handle 100% projects or do they have ongoing maintenance or support activities? Great question. We are a little bit unique. Our team, all of our team does both projects and support. Right. And I know most organizations separate those 2 teams, and that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's pretty good. The reason we don't separate it is because we are subject matter experts in a particular area, happens to be Citrix and AVD. And the person that implements it is also the person that supports it. So they better do a good job because if anything goes wrong, they're going to get the call, or one of the colleagues will get the call. The only reason we can do that is because we don't do level 1, level 2 support. Our customers already have other companies doing that, or they have their own service desk IT people. We only do level 3, level 4. So we implement the projects and we support the projects that they are exactly the same people. Why is this important? Because I think, David, your question probably is based on that makes things a lot harder. Obviously, it's easier if you have a separate project team and a separate support team. So what we do is we use the visualization tool, TopLeft, and we schedule work and we queue work, and we don't care whether it's project or tickets. So if someone's supposed to be working on this project this week, then you'll see their diary and their queue will be tickets for that project. If they are supposed to be working on tickets for the next week, you'll see tickets in their queue. It's the same queue. So we don't have a problem because they work off one queue, one schedule, whether it's project or tickets. Bottleneck resources are protected from unnecessary tickets, of course. All right. So the follow-up question, yes, how do you avoid multitasking them? Well, you focus on your bottleneck resource being protected. Okay. There's going to be, you're not going to eliminate multitasking. You're going to eliminate it from your bottleneck resource, and you're going to minimize it in the rest of the team. Okay. There is such a thing as good and bad multitasking. Here's an example of good multitasking. I'm working on a project, doesn't need to finish till next week. Customer calls, their whole site is down. 300 people can't work. You bet I'm going to multitask. I will stop what I'm doing. I'll fix the 300 people, and then it takes me 20% extra time to get back to what I'm doing. Totally worth it. Right? So not all multitasking is bad. It's about prioritizing. Does that answer your question, David? think so. That
Yeah.
helps. Cool.
And yeah, on that project versus services team split, like I obviously love the book Making Work Visible by Dominica De Grande, and she's really against having separate teams because you lose so much knowledge. Your project team deploys it, and then it's thrown over the wall to service, and now you're waiting on each other for that knowledge.
You know what DevOps is, right?
Yeah.
And you know the Phoenix Project was one of the books that sort of kicked that whole movement off. We have a thing called ProjOps. So we actually combine projects with operations because we can, right? It is harder to do, I totally admit it. But in the development world, that's what we all do now. The devs work with the operational people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So structuring by skill area.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions?
You covered a lot of these. You covered pretty much all of these. Yeah, I guess any other final thoughts for somebody starting this journey from
well,
on Agile, Lean, and just getting into this? Because there can be huge changes. So you can get bogged down with lots of tickets, lots in the backlog, lots of noise tickets. Like they could have hundreds of open tickets and whatever. And they might have to make big changes with the team.
Well, the obvious thing, and of course, you know, this is obvious. You run TopLeft, you clean up what we call stinky tickets, like stuff that's been sitting around forever, and you go, is this still needed? Should we just fix it? So focus on finishing your actual tickets, and you can only do that by visualizing the tickets and seeing how long they've been open for, when the last time entry was in there, and how far over budget they are, and all that sort of stuff. Once you clean that up, then you start implementing the stuff. You don't want to implement in a mess. You want to implement where you've got a little bit of sanity in your environment. Yeah. So, Wim, use TopLeft. There you go. I'm sure you are. You've got the share.
Yeah, we use it internally at TopLeft for sales marketing projects. Is it perfect? No, there's more I need to get into there, but we're using it. It's been really helpful. So I guess final question, you mentioned the scenario with your Kanban board for the engineers can have their project in the service, it's prioritized, visualized, they just got to keep working it. Who cares what it is, right? But you still need a project manager who's thinking about who is the bottleneck, what are the schedules and timeframes, right?
Correct.
With their own views. Yeah.
Yeah. And that could be your service delivery manager if you've only got a small team. That could be dedicated project manager or project managers if you've got a PMO, and right, depends on the size of your company.
Yeah.
And we deal with very large companies, and obviously their IT departments. And guess what, guys? I'm sure the people that deal with large will know this. They are in a complete mess. They don't do any of this stuff, right? And it scares the hell out of me. And we, by stealth, we implement some of this stuff with them, especially the prerequisites. And then they start to see all of our projects run well and projects with other suppliers not run well. And they go, well, what are we doing different here? So we slowly teach them how to change their way so that all their projects run well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I talk to MSPs obviously every week, and sometimes it shocks me. They've been using, let's say, ConnectWise for 19 years, and I've never really used a project module. I'm like, what?
Because it was shit. Let me be frank. It was, and without a visualization tool, I'll say it on camera, it still is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. Again, that was, thank you for
explaining. If anyone's got any further questions, by the way, just to be clear, I don't consult in this. I do present these things and I help our clients. But if anyone wants to reach out, go through Wim. Happy to give you a few extra pointers, not a problem.
Yeah. Thank you for that offer, Steve. And I guess we'll wrap it up there. Thank you everyone for being here, and again, reach out if you've got questions, and we'll leave it there. So again, I learned a lot. There's a whole bunch I'm going to go implement from this myself. So never too old to learn on this stuff. We're all students.
We're all students. Spot on. Thanks, Wim.
Yeah.
Have a great day. See ya.